Okay, this morning we are reaching the end of the book of Leviticus, and it raises a set of issues which are intensely political, so I'm going to apologize in advance. So if you'll open to Parshat Behar, which you'll find in the Chumash on page 738. Okay? Oop, careful. Page 738. Did everybody have one? Okay. We don't have any? Where do they go? I don't understand. Every week they're here, and every week by the time we get back, they're gone. I don't know. We'll send someone to go get some. All right, so here's the question that we're coming to the end of the book of Leviticus. As I indicated last week, the first half of the book of Leviticus is ritual. It is a shop manual for the priests of Israel leading worship, specifically sacrificial worship, which was very gooey and very messy. And the first 18 chapters of Leviticus have to do with the priest's procedures for approaching God through sacrifice. Then in the middle of the book, we have the Holiness Code, which is that Parsha called Kedoshim, which is directed not to the priests but to the populace, and has to do with the adoption of a certain code of behavior, which is called Kedusha, of holiness. And I indicated to you last time that we talked that I think that what's at the heart of that is this. Brian, can you do me a small favor? Put your coffee down, find a maintenance person, and tell them we need about a dozen chumashim, okay? Thanks so much. Any maintenance person will give you the same look, so good luck. Y'all want what? You know, they're sweet people. They're really lovely people. They just, I don't know what they do with these chumashim. I mean, take them home and sell them on eBay or something. I don't know. Someone's getting something out of Torah at Valley Beshalom, right? The Holiness Code, I think, is a representation of the Bible's broader theme of solidarity, of how do you create human solidarity, and how do you displace that deep sense of ego that each of us walks around with, and adopt a sense that that the circle of community, of family, of nationhood and humanity that exists around me is part of my sense of self. That, I think, is what Kedoshim is about. When we get to these last two sections, particularly today's Torah portion, they're going to take some of those very broad ideas and apply them to the most controversial area of that idea, and that's money. Today we're talking about money. Not Shabbos, you're not supposed to talk about money on Shabbos, but we're going to talk about money on Shabbos. And we're going to ask a question which I think, very interestingly to me, has become now part of the political conversation of American political life, because Senator Sanders has raised it very explicitly, which is, what do we owe each other? Is there such thing as economic justice? Justice, meaning everyone get what they deserve, and economic, meaning has to do with our money. And what happens not only to the society, how does a society reach toward economic justice? What does economic justice look like in a society? But what happens to human character when money becomes a major motivation? Now remember two things. Number one, the priests who promulgated these texts, the priests who wrote these texts, thank you. The priests who publicized these texts, and eventually, I think, the priests who were the ones who included it in the Torah, priests own nothing. When you're a member of the house of Levi, which means you're of the priest or Levitical class, you are outside of the economy. Priests own nothing. The priest was a person who was supported by the community in order to do the sacred work of the community. But priests, the tribe of Levi was the only tribe in Israel that did not receive an allotment of land. Instead, it received the allotment of worship. So when you brought sacrifices, the priest took a cut of that. And you were commanded to support the Levite who lived in your community. So the priests, who are the ones who are writing this stuff, are the ones who are standing outside the economy. And they're watching the function of this economy. And what they're interested in doing, as you'll see, is to modify the economy because they can see what its flaws are. They can see where it's going. Now, did any of this stuff ever happen? Very doubtful. And we'll talk about why in just a moment as you get into this. Let's go back to the question, though. And Senator Sanders has been raising this question in the election. And I'm not endorsing him or supporting him, or I know there's lots of problems with his issues. So that's not the point. What's interesting is that you can say this out loud in America. Right? There was a long time in America that if you stood up and said, I'm a socialist, they'd kill you. Right? The fact that the guy can say, I'm a democratic socialist, and he's getting millions of people to vote for him. Right? To me, that's very, very interesting. And then on the other side, you have a man who is a fairly committed capitalist running for president. Of him, we will say other things in a minute. So here's the question. The question of economic justice is, what does it mean? What's fair? What's just? So let's start from the very beginning. Economics is the science of watching how people enter a marketplace, and a marketplace is a place of exchange, and we sell things and buy things. Some of us sell our labor, some of us sell our expertise, some of us sell our capital, the money we've already come up with, and we sell it for the prices that the marketplace assigns to us. Now, the original idea, if you remember Thomas Hobbes and John Locke of English liberal tradition, is that the marketplace is 100% free, because the marketplace itself, or Adam Smith, remember? The marketplace itself regulates. It regulates the price of these things. It regulates the price of labor. It regulates the price of expertise. It regulates the price of capital. You show up and say, I have something to sell. I show up and say, I'm interested in buying. We haggle a bit, and we figure out what's the right price. And as long as I go home happy that I got something at a good price, and you go home happy that you got the money you wanted, everybody's very happy, right? Except that sometimes the marketplace is less than equitable. Right? Sometimes we have government step in and say, well, that's not exactly that way. And because sometimes people do things in the marketplace which are not exactly fair. Either they withhold product, or they hoard product, right? Or they begin to manipulate prices in lots of different ways. So government enters in and says, okay, we'll establish some rules. You have to tell the other guy what it is you're selling. Caveat emptor is a great, buyer beware is a great rule, but you got to be reasonable about this. And if the car's broken, tell him it's broken. And if he buys it without you telling him it's broken, he can bring it back to you. That's a rule in the marketplace, right? Problem is, what happens when people accumulate sufficient political power to begin manipulating the rules in their side? So the used car dealers all get together and say, well, you have to disclose all of the service records of the car, except not the ones before 5 years ago. Or you can't push odometers back, right? There's something like that. So people begin to manipulate. So this becomes part of the question, right? And then you get more aggressive kinds of, suppose one of the marketplace, this is what happened here and what Bernie talks about a lot, suppose in the marketplace somebody goes bust. Somebody goes broke, okay? What is the marketplace's obligation to the one who goes broke? Well, no, first of all, does the marketplace owe anything to the guy who goes broke? That's number one. No, well, don't say yes, don't say no. Think about this for a minute. What if the guy who goes broke is somebody we all need, like the bank? Are there players in the marketplace who are, and I quote, too big to fail? And does the marketplace have to step in and then bail them out? Because without them, we don't have a marketplace? I mean, this becomes kind of... So the question is, does economic justice mean that we start the marketplace with a set of rules, and as long as those rules are observed, we all get what we deserve? Or does economic justice mean that we manipulate some of the goals, some of the end products of the marketplace? Suppose after several rounds of playing Monopoly, I own most of the board and I have hotels on all of my properties, and all you own is Baltic Avenue. And there's nothing but ones under your table, right? That's all the money you have left, right? Number one, that makes for a very bad game. Number two, you come to me and you say, listen, I can't live this way. And then you say to me something else, by the way. You say, Either you give me either you give me New York Avenue in a hotel, or I'm turning the game upside down. I mean, is there ever a point at which the outcomes of the economic game have to be regulated in order for this to end up fair? You see the questions that are being asked here? So I want you to think of this from a theoretical standpoint, because really this is what Bernie Sanders' campaign is all about. And I think it's a very interesting question in America right now about what constitutes economic justice. If certain people in our culture make hundreds of millions of dollars, and others of us have a hard time affording putting food on the table, is that justice? And if the reason you can't put food on the table is because the thing is stacked in such a way that you can't do it, Sanders' speech the other day, I think he was here in California, his speech the other day was, if you're working 40 hours a week, you shouldn't be below the poverty line. All right, I'm sympathetic with that. The question is that really true? Right? I mean, then think about it, and then what are the implications of messing with that kind of thing? Do we support prices and wages and things like that? You see where this gets complicated? All right, so some of you studied economics in college, right? But you all need to be aware of this, because this is going to be a big deal in the election. This is going to, whoever the presumptive nominees are going to end up being, this question of what is justice in the marketplace. Now, when we open the Torah has a couple of prejudices, and you'll see what they are in a moment. I can show you one of them right away. If you want to take a look at page 742, and then we'll go back to the beginning. Look at 742. The Hebrew at the beginning, top right-hand corner, top left-hand corner, ki yamuch achicha. Ki yamuch achicha. If your kinsman is in straits. The Hebrew word yamuch means to fall down. Achicha means your brother. So the first thing we're talking about here is the poor person is not some stranger. The poor person is not somebody the victim of the economy is not somebody else. Oh, we have some chumashim now, so bring them in, we'll pass them out. The victim of the economy is to be looked upon as your brother. Okay, everybody got one? Okay, we good? Start with 742. I just want to show you a phrase, a 3-word phrase that I think is terribly important, that I think is the deepest motivation of the stuff we're going to study today. Ki yamuch achicha. The achicha means your brother. It's translated here as kinsman, but I think your brother is a better way to put it. Okay? Or your sister. What you've got to recognize is that the poor are not strangers from another planet. And I'm going to say this is, I think, a very serious issue. I gave a sermon once about the Staples Center. Anyone been to the Staples Center? You know what I'm talking about? The arena downtown, right? Somebody gave me some very expensive tickets to take my kids to go see Crosby, Stills, and Nash, which was a wonderful concert. And my son turned to me and said, Abba, you're the youngest person here, It was very strange, all these gray-haired ponytails, Anyway, the Staples Center is such an interesting thing because it's built in 3 different levels, right? There's a floor level, there's a mezzanine level, and there's an upper level. And there's 3 different entrances for the 3 levels with different escalators and different bathrooms and different snack stands and different souvenir places. It is the most remarkable image of a class society I've ever seen in my life, right? I mean, in England, there's a sense of class, but in America, we all like to think of ourselves as middle class. We're a basically equal middle class society, except we're not. And the Staples Center says, I don't have to mix with the hoi polloi. I don't want to have to mix with these lower class, not so good smelling people. I'm going to sit on the bottom with Jack Nicholson and, and Dr. Buss and my people, and you schleppers go upstairs where you can barely breathe. And not only do I have to not see you, I don't have to even get in the same escalator with you. You can't go from level to level at the Staples Center except by going outside and getting back on the other escalator. If you ever wanted an emblem of a society that's class separated, there it is, right? You live in a neighborhood in which all the property values are in a certain range. You never meet poor people. You'd have a hard time meeting poor people in Encino. Because the cheapest house in 91436 or 91316, the cheapest, you buy a garage at $750,000. Right? And then these, you just don't meet people of a different economic level. So children grow up in our neighborhoods never having met anybody whose economic level is significantly below theirs. Now, they'll meet richer people. They'll meet people who drive cars. If you drive a nice Lexus, they'll have a friend who's getting dropped off at school in a Maserati. They'll meet richer people, but they'll very rarely meet poor people.
How about the 50,000 Mexican babies?
Well, that's the only time, and that's an interesting way to put it. The only time that they meet people, A, who are poorer than they are, and B, of color, are in service roles. The maid, the garbage man, the gardener, the roofer, the plumber. Right? But even public schools are highly, have reverted to a more neighborhood-based, number one. And even the schools that are integrated. I was once invited to Taft High School, which is a very, very big public high school here in Woodland Hills. And the kids, there's a Jewish studies club, so I was their guest one afternoon. I got there at lunchtime, and I walked through the quad with my student guide, and I said, gee, all these wonderful kids, and they're all eating together. I said, oh my God, it's wonderful. He said, no, Rabbi, no. He says, look, those are the Persian Jewish kids, and those are the Persian Muslim kids, and they're at war with the Armenian kids, who hate the Egyptian kids, who would never, ever mix with the Salvadorans, who can't stand the Guatemalans, who hate the Mexicans. Each ethnic group has its sort of station around the quad. I'm not kidding. They have their station around the quad. I said, don't you guys ever get together? He says, sometimes we're put in the same classes, but we really don't talk to each other. I'm suggesting, so the Torah's first thing that you have to recognize is, Ki amuch achicha, there are poor people, and they're yours. They're your problem. They're part of your family. They're your responsibility. You can't close your eyes and pretend they don't exist. You can't close your eyes and pretend they're not there. Come on and have a seat. Come on, you've got plenty of room. So the Torah's problem is, what do I do about that? What do I do about that? And the Torah, and I think this is the second presumption which you have to understand, is not only is that person your achicha, the member of your family, the Torah is deeply worried about that. And here I think is, again, something that I hear in the Sanders campaign. Again, I'm not endorsing him, but it's so interesting, the campaign, and then the way the campaign is being listened to by the larger culture. Let me put it as grossly as I can. The Torah is deeply offended by the presence of poverty in a wealthy society. That there's something obscene about that. And the only comparison that the Torah can come up with to give you a sense of how angry this is if you look at it very carefully, go to page 743, and look at what it says. If your kinsman being in straits, it's the same word, ki amuch achicha, comes under your authority, and you hold him as though a resident alien, let him live by your side. Do not exact from him. Let him go down to the end. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan to be your God. In the same way that the enslavement of God's people was an offense to God, you should look at poverty in your midst. It is on that level of a moral offensive thing, a moral sin. It is on that level. And I think what we're hearing here is the priestly class. Because unlike everybody else, the priests lived among everybody, and the priests owned no property. So the priests living outside of the economy get to see the interactions of people of multiple classes and multiple economic levels, and they see what happens. And the priests see poverty, and they live with poverty. And they're offended by it. And there is a sense of just being offended by it. I don't know how many of you got to see this wonderful HBO program on Lyndon Johnson. It's called, what is it, All the Way? All the Way. Did you see this? Bryan Cranston, who is a very good television actor, did a marvelous job playing Lyndon Johnson. Did he really? Did it? Really? No kidding. In your class?
No, Larry and Mark.
Really? Wow. So Lyndon Johnson, in the middle of it, tells a story. He says to Martin Luther King, he talks to Martin Luther King about, if once I win this election, I'm going to declare a war on poverty. And King says, what do you care? And Johnson tells him this story. It's a true story, that when Johnson first graduated college, he went to Texas State Teachers College, the only job he could get was down on the border. And he taught first grade in a school of Mexican immigrant kids. And the kids came in hungry every day to school. And Lyndon Johnson, who was as American as you can get, he just said, this just isn't the America I want to live in. And you could feel in the man this deep sense of, it was offensive to him that children would suffer this way in a culture so wealthy that they would be discriminated against in the way. There was a remarkable thing. It was a remarkable, and Cranston does a beautiful job of capturing his deep emotions about this. I think you've got to feel that here. I think you've got to feel that here. So we'll get to the policies in a minute, which you're going to laugh at. But I think you've got to feel the deep offensive nature of poverty to the Bible, at least to the priestly class of the Bible. And the question of, is poverty the natural outcome of a free market economy? And if poverty is the inevitable, necessary, and outcome of a free market economy, then it can't be holy. Then the economy can't be holy. I'm going to fix the damn air conditioner. This has become my fate in life. This is God's way of laughing at me, So now turn back to the beginning. Turn back to the beginning. Ready? So we're back at 738. You ready? This you know. Vaydaber Adonai Moshe lemor. God said to Moses, Behar Sinai. Now, of course, I'm sorry, it'll be warm in a minute and we'll all be schwitzing, but hell, I know. I think we're going to come in bathing suits and just make this a sauna. What do you think? The Weiner sauna. Soon there'll be a new one. All right. So there's a great question in the Midrash about why does he evoke Har Sinai in that opening sentence? Every other time that God speaks to Moses, it's Daber al b'nei Yisrael v'yamarta alehem. But here you throw in Har Sinai. What is Har Sinai? What does Mount Sinai add to this? Right? Because you might say, and Rashi's answer is, because you might say that on Mount Sinai, God gave us like the real laws, the 10 Commandments, and the laws about worship, and the laws about temple, and the laws about Sukkot, and Pesach, and Kashrus. That's Judaism, but when it comes to money, that's not so important. So you put in Har Sinai because this is that important, because this is core Jewish teaching. Ready? Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I assigned to you, you're not coming into this land. You didn't earn this land. You didn't deserve that. I'm giving you this. This is a gift. Not really a gift, a loan, a lease. The land shall observe a Sabbath of the Lord. 6 years you may sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard, gathering the yield. But in the 7th year the land shall have a Sabbath of complete rest. So 6 years you're going to grow stuff on a field. What's going to happen in year 7? Now think for a minute. What's going to happen in year 7? The land lies fallow. You do not cultivate the land. What do you eat? What you grew in year 6. Okay. Now year 7 you don't cultivate the land. What do you eat in year 8? While you're growing the new crop. You eat whatever you could gather from the land. Right? You're allowed to go out to the land, and if you plant a field and you grow stuff for 6 years consecutively, in the 7th year, even if you don't cultivate the land, it will spontaneously grow pretty much the same stuff you cultivated because there's enough seed left in the ground to do that, right? So in the 7th year, you're allowed to go out and collect whatever the ground is going to spontaneously produce. Except that's a very different act. Now think about that. What are you going to do? You're going to go, you can't cultivate the ground, you can't irrigate it, you just go out and gather what's there. Who's going to go out and gather what's there? You are the farmer and all the people who live on the field. So what's going to happen during that year 7? Everybody goes out and gleans. Gleaning is what poor people do. Remember, the law was that that you go through the field once, you harvest a field once, and anything that's not harvested in the first field, that's left for the fatherless, the stranger, and the widow. So in year 7, everybody get that law? Everybody understand that law, right? You are the farmer, you cultivate a field, you irrigate the field, you prepare the field, and when harvest time comes, you're permitted one pass through the field. Anything you didn't collect on that day, the poor are allowed to come into the field and take it. Not just allowed, that's theirs. It belongs to them. So fundamentally, in the 7th year, everybody becomes poor. You don't have a sure means of support. You're depending upon whatever spontaneously grows out of the field. So if you're a very wealthy farmer, in that 1 year, you get to spend a whole year living in the condition of economic insecurity that poor people live all the time. Not just that, but that year, the field technically doesn't belong to you. Because everybody's gleaning the field. You and your poor schlepper neighbor go out to the field as equals. So in 1 year of the 7-year cycle, the economic hierarchy collapses and everybody becomes a gleaner. You become you're just as wealthy or just as poor as the guy who works for you. And you can't tell the guy who works for you to go and get stuff for you. Because in that year, nobody owns that field. Everybody is allowed to go get it. So for that 1 year, the rich guy now doesn't have the sense of security that I have a big bank account behind me. And the poor guy doesn't feel like he's the only one in the community who's dependent. And in that 1 year, rich and poor are equal and go out to the field together. Wouldn't you love to see Donald Trump out there schlepping his own groceries, pumping his own gas, sweeping his own driveway, making beds in the hotel? Wouldn't that be wonderful? 1 year, the guy who's named ginormous letters on has to be a maid. Oh, cleaning the toilets. What?
What about Hillary?
Hillary, yes. 1 year out of 7, Hillary has to go out and clean emails. You may not reap you cannot reap the aftergrowth of the harvest. You can't harvest it, but you can go out and take whatever you want to eat, right? You may eat whatever the land during its Sabbath will produce. You, your male and female slave, the hired and bound labor who live with you. You go out with them together because in that year you're effectively economically equals. So what's bothering the Torah? What's bothering the Torah is the long-term ethical impact of having a social hierarchy where certain people have, and other people don't have at all. So 1 year out of 7, everybody becomes equal again. It's a really crazy idea. Wait, it gets worse. Now it's really going to get, do you think that's nuts? He says the Torah, wait, only getting started. But wait, as they say on television. You will count off 7 weeks of years. 7 times 7 years, 49 years. So that the period of 7 weeks a year gives you a total of 49 years. That shows you that the Torah could do math. Then you shall sound the horn loud. You'll blow the shofar. In the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, the day of atonement, you shall have the horn sounded throughout the land. and you will hallow the 50th year. Okay? You shall proclaim rest throughout the land for all its inhabitants. That's the saying on the Liberty Bell. Little does the guys who wrote it on the Liberty Bell know that that's the most socialist thing they could have written on an American icon, right? You know, V'kror dror ba'aretz, right? V'kratim dror ba'aretz. It shall be a jubilee. I mean, listen to the context of that verse and ask yourself, did the founding fathers know what they were writing on the damn Liberty Bell, right? They didn't, because if they did, they'd be upset. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you shall return to his holding, and each of you shall return to his family. That 50th year shall be a jubilee. You'll not sow, you'll not reap the aftergrowth of the harvest. It's a jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You'll only eat the growth directly from the field. In the year of jubilee, each of you will return to his holding. Now, because this is such a crazy idea, the Torah is now going to give you details, which it normally almost never does. I mean, the Torah says, Lo tirtzach, don't murder. And it leaves you to your imagination. What's murder? How do I adjudicate murder? What's the between murder and self-defense? But when it comes to this, look how much verbiage is going to be devoted to defining this. Because this is such a crazy idea. In the year of Jubilee, each of you shall return to his holding. When you sell property to your neighbor, buy from any of your neighbor. You'll not wrong one another. In buying from a neighbor, you'll only deduct the number of years since the Jubilee. In selling to you, he'll only charge you for the remaining crop years. The more such years, the higher the price you pay. The fewer years, the lower the price. What he's selling is the number of harvests. Wrong one another, but fear God. All right, so what's the rule? Year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you farm. Year 7, you gather. Everyone becomes equal. Except if that year 7 has to be the 7th of the 7 years, it's year 49. Now comes year 50. Rosh Hashanah, then Yom Kippur, year 50. A horn is sounded on Yom Kippur, year 50. And we said Shana Haba Yerushalayim. Except instead of going back after shul to your house to eat bagels, where do you go? You go back to your ancestral holding. In other words, this is monopoly. You go back to go and you get your $200 back. You wipe off all the hotels and houses off the board. You know what I'm talking about, right? People play Monopoly? If you don't know what I'm talking about, I apologize. So the theory of this economy is, this economy posits a year 0. In year 0, we entered the land of Israel, and Joshua, who was the general appointed by Moshe, divided up the land, and every tribe got land, and every family in every tribe got land, and everybody knows what their land is or was, right? Even if you move off that land into the city, if you sell it, or if you abandon it, everybody knows what their ancestral land is. In year 50, you give up all of your real estate possessions, not movable possessions, but real possessions, real estate, wherever you're living, and everybody goes back to their ancestral holding. Everybody goes back to the homestead they started. So in other words, in year 50, you wind the economy back, all the way back to a place where everybody starts all over again equal. You take a big putty knife and you scrape Trump off the top of that building, and he goes back to Queens where he belongs, to a crappy neighborhood in Kew Gardens, where he started from, right? And some poor Irish family that was living on 5th Avenue and 57th Street, they get Trump Tower, because that's their holding. And everybody goes back to where they started from. And we start the economy all over. If you're playing Monopoly or a board game, you push all the money into the middle of the board and then redistribute it and start all over again. What do you think? What a great idea. Now, the Torah already is anticipating you saying, but, and that's why you get all this verbiage here. That's why you're going to get 3-4 pages of if. Right. What if I built a 50-story building on the place? Do the people who come back to it get my 50-story building and not compensate for me? What if I've had 7 children and over the course of 50 years you could have 2, 3 generations? Who gets what? What if? You're right. The Torah is going to give you rules for some of this stuff, but it's not going to be able to cover all the cases. What is the Torah trying to accomplish? It is frightened of one thing. And it's interesting that it's frightened of something that we've become inured. We've learned how to ignore. It's called systemic poverty. Systemic poverty. What is systemic poverty? One generation goes into poverty. The second generation grows up in poverty. The third generation is now born into poverty. By the time that third generation is born into poverty, what happens to poverty? It becomes not just an economic fact, it becomes a mindset. It becomes a mindset. Look, most of us had grandparents or great-grandparents who came to this country and had nothing. Look, everybody had grandparents who had nothing. They had very little. But our grandparents and our great-grandparents came to this country with very little, except number one, they didn't know they had very little. And number two, they had an attitude that I will soon have what I need. I will work hard. I will invest in my children. I will maintain family life, and I will have what I need. The difference between the attitude of our immigrant grandparents and those who live in systemic poverty is that the ones who live in systemic poverty, having never seen sustenance, they give up. If you're a ghetto kid and you know that you can make a lot more money selling drugs or stealing cars than you can going to college and becoming a lawyer, and your chances of getting rich selling drugs are much greater than your chances of getting in and getting through UCLA, you're going to steal cars and sell drugs. And your heroes will be car thieves and drug dealers. And you will go get your girlfriend pregnant because it's the greatest sign of your virility in a culture that makes you feel like you're about an inch tall. And you're going to enjoy a certain kind of music which lionizes those who sell drugs and steal cars and act violently, and the police. You end up with a culture of poverty which embraces poverty. And if you don't know that the inside of that culture, because you see it from the outside, you say, like, what the hell's wrong with these people? You know, just buckle down and go to school. Well, yeah, buckle down and go to school is okay if you know that your poverty is temporary. But if you come to believe that poverty is what you are, is that the horizon of your human possibility stops at a certain point because you'll never pass that, because you've never met anybody who looks like you who passed that level, except drug dealers, car thieves, rap musicians, athletes. Then you say, hell, that's my world, you see? Systemic poverty is a very dangerous thing because then it's almost impossible to get you out of it. Now, there was a prophet in America who once said this, and he got killed for it. His name was Daniel Patrick Moynihan. He was a professor at Harvard, and he wrote a very important study where he said the greatest threat to the security of the United States of America is the decline of the black family, 1965. And he was just excoriated for this. Racist, racist, racist. Turns out he was absolutely right. And now we've seen, another 50 years of what he was talking about. This is what the Torah is talking about. And the Torah is so worried about this, about the inner destruction of human beings through systemic poverty, that it's willing to put forward the craziest idea. Rewind the whole economy every 50 years and start over. And just for a moment, what would this look like? You take all the money in all the banks and put it in the middle and divide it up among 330 million Americans. How's that?
You'd have more poverty forever.
Just think, just stop for a moment. I think this is a cool idea. You take all the money in Citibank and all the banks, You take all the money and all the you take all the money that's traded on the New York Stock Exchange, you take it and send everybody a check. How's that? Good idea for some.
Not for everybody.
Well, it depends on if you have more or less than what that check's going to be, right?
They're doing that now.
No.
Everybody's getting a check.
Allocate the national debt.
They're not doing it now. They're doing it in a minor way, in a small. But you see, but what you get here. I just want to finish this. You have a priest, and the priest doesn't have land. He lives a landless life. He lives a life not of poverty, but he lives a life without possessions. And he looks and he sees what the cumulative effect of poverty on a culture is. And he puts forth a crazy idea. And if you look at how many pages now, he keeps going by, going, if. Look how many paragraphs begin with the word if. You see how many ifs there are? Because he's dealing with all of the practical considerations of his theory. And they're overwhelming. They're just overwhelming. And if you imagine that, if you know the economy of the Torah's text, the whole world was created in one chapter. Look how much verbiage is generated trying to deal with the problems of this idea. Right? I suggest to you that he knows it's impractical. But then he gives you one last idea. So turn to page 746. I'll talk to you in a minute. This is the end of the Parsha, right? Okay? He says, you will not make idols for yourself or set up carved images or pillars. Stop a second. What does that have to do with the problem of systemic poverty? How is that the end, the conclusion of the problem of poverty? What is he saying? Why is this the closing maftir, the closing section of the Torah portion? Yeah, part of it's you're not God. I think that what he's trying to say is, yeah, I hear all of your objections. And I'm saddened by those objections. Because those objections are ultimately not practical. Those objections are ultimately based on the fact that you've come to worship money. That you've come to worship yourself. That you've forgotten what you owe the other. There's a certain idolatry in this. But, Rabbi, it won't work because... And the Levite who writes the text is saying, yeah, I know it's not practical, but for a moment, dream with me and recognize that what you're objecting to is not the practicality of the idea. It's that you're so attached to all you own. It's become such part of your own self-definition that it's become a god to you. Stop for a moment and consider what I'm saying. It's the strongest language he could think of to say, just think about this a second. All right, let's get some comments. Yes, Douglas, please.
At the time that Moynihan wrote his report,
Yeah.
the single-parent household in African-American families
Yeah.
was in the low 20s.
Yeah, now it's like in the 80s, right?
50 years of anti-poverty programs, and
Right.
in the 70s.
Right.
Do you think that any of those anti-poverty programs and the incentives that they created had anything to do with those two facts?
Do I think so?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's two questions. One,
So did the government
wait,
screw it up?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's the first question is, did the anti-poverty programs help or hurt? That's the first question, and that's a pragmatic question. That's not a ethical question. It's a pragmatic question. I mean, go take a look and see, right? If you had Moynihan in the room, he would say to you, no, the reason, here's what Moynihan would say, and you can argue with him. I fully acknowledge you can argue with him. He would say to you, it's 50 years of half-baked poverty programs that you never really did take seriously what it means to invest in education. You never really did take seriously what it would take to lift families out of poverty. You did it in a tepid way. You did it halfway.
With billions and trillions of dollars.
Yes, with billions of trillions of dollars. But let's think for a moment. We fought a war in Vietnam. What did that cost? And then we fought a war in Iraq twice. What did that cost? If those monies had been invested, this is what Moynihan would say. I'm a good ventriloquist. I'm playing Moynihan here. Moynihan would say, if the culture had really taken seriously the war on poverty, right, then you may have had different outcomes. I'm not, you can argue and say that the structure of those programs provided incentives that further destroyed the black family, that the structure of those programs provided incentives that further destroyed the dignity of African American men. You can make a very strong case of those.
Backed up by facts.
Absolutely, and you can also make a very strong case that, had Head Start and kindergarten programs and other kinds of programs, had they been really truly funded to the levels they should have been, you'd have had different outcomes 50 years later. You can argue these things. This is a great argument, by the way. If I were running for president, this would be the sort of thing I would sort of maybe like to hear in the world.
I'll vote for you.
I know. Instead of the size of my hands, and things like that. Yes, please.
Okay, so I just want to say, this is a really interesting argument. It reminds me of Rawls, like it was a
Right.
philosophy argument of like
Right.
everybody, if we were all equal,
Right.
everybody would be, and didn't have like an opportunity to figure out where we would land in the economy, we would all be terrified
Right.
to wipe the slate clean because we would have such a large chance of losing what we have.
Right.
And I think it's really cool because Americans don't like to acknowledge the amount of like luck and kind of certain circumstances that brought you to where you are. But if you think about if you had to start again in 50 years, you'd be really scared that you wouldn't be able to get to the same level again.
Right.
And that would have to
Right.
so that it stands
Right.
that it wasn't you who brought yourself to that level, which is a combination of circumstances.
Yeah, that's the ethical issue, which is a very important issue. There's she says that the problem is, what's your name? Shifra. The problem is, there's a famous philosopher of justice named John Rawls, who basically said, justice is when we all agree on the rules of the game and then we play the game according to those rules and whatever happens, happens. Right? Not knowing the outcome of the game, would you agree to the rules at the outset? Right? Okay? Okay, so she says the problem is that if you wipe the slate clean, you'd be really insecure that you'd ever get back to where you started from. Right? So here's the interesting. So the interesting argument is that it's not just a insecurity, right? It's that what happens is that the rules of the game were rigged from the very beginning. So there's a very controversial sociologist named Charles Murray, who happens to be a very conservative guy, and he writes about the split in America right now between an America. A poor America and a rich America, right? If your parents attended Ivy League colleges, right, you have a 10 times better chance of going to an Ivy League college, right? If your economic success is much more predicted by your zip code than your IQ, okay? Because the endemic advantages to living in certain neighborhoods, gaining certain schooling, having certain ways of looking at the world are transferred generation to generation, and that sets in place class differences which can never be undone, right? Which can never be undone. So what people are really afraid of is losing those advantages, of losing those, So when Bernie Sanders says the system's rigged, right? And people feel like it's rigged. That's sort of what they're talking about. I mean, and it's a really interesting question. Now, here you get I just want to show you, by the way, if you think Bernie Sanders is radical, here's your Torah. Bernie says, let's tax the rich and take down the banks, and the Torah says, no, let's take all the money out of the bank, put it in the middle, and redivide it all. It's like, whoa, right? So I just want to show you that democratic socialism, he comes by it honestly, all right? It's just very interesting stuff. Pop, yeah. What? Prosbul was a mechanism, a legal mechanism for Jews who wanted to observe the letter of the Torah to escape the spirit of the law. Because what happens is, even the 7-year rule, is very hard to observe. Because if you think about it, what am I going to eat during year 8? It's a very scary thing not to have an income, It's a very scary thing. And the Prosbul was a way of transferring debt through the 50th year, so that nobody would lose their debts in the 50th year. Here's the problem with the other problem is that, and the Torah goes through this. If I want to buy a car, a house, a business, I need to borrow money. If the Yovel, if the Jubilee is coming, you're not going to lend me money. Because in that 50th year, all the debts are canceled, you see? If all the debts are canceled in the 50th year, hell if I'm lending you any money, right? Because you'll just put off the payments till you're 50 and then say goodbye, right? It's sort of like a bankruptcy law, you know? Not that anyone running for president ever knows anything about bankruptcy law, right? But, you know, bankruptcy law, so the question, so what the Prose Bull did is it said that's only personal debt, not corporate debt. And they turned personal debt into corporate debt. You turn the debt over to the court, and the court holds the note through the 50th year and gives it back to the note holder in year one. So that was a legal mechanism, because you can't have a money economy where you can't lend and borrow money.
Okay, one more thing.
This is terribly impractical. I just want to make it very clear. I'm not suggesting that we do this.
Like, one more thing. If poverty and slavery is abhorrent to God,
Yeah.
God waited 400 years to free the children of Israel.
Well, not quite 400, but okay.
Laissez-faire capitalism is only 200 years.
You got 200 years.
200 more
Yeah,
years
yeah.
before we have to do anything about it.
There you go. Okay, fair enough. So who's in the back? Stuart.
I would advocate that what Bernie is saying in regard to education, though, has some merit, because my minimal life that I had was erased by education.
Right.
And at the UC system, it was $50 a semester.
Right.
And today, if you're trying to get out of poverty, or you're trying to improve your lot, the educational costs, which is the latter, is very expensive.
That's a wonderful observation. So the question of school tuition, but I want to add something to that, okay? Because I've had some experience in education. It takes more than just getting the kid into the school.
Yeah.
It takes an attitude. It takes a certain amount of personal discipline. Look, it's really hard to give up a night of playing and sit at your desk and study. It takes a certain attitude about how to negotiate the educational system, right? I was a tiny little idea. I had the same experience. My parents, I'm the first one in the family to finish college. Both of my parents went to college, but went on to other things in the world and did very well. But because I'm the first one in the family to finish college, college was a sort of new thing to me and my family. My kids had a much easier time in college because they grew up with parents who knew how to negotiate college, who knew how to negotiate this stuff, who knew how to deal with the social structure of a university. My little brother had an easier time negotiating. I had to go and study, economics. He got to go study theater, So
They said you can go any college in the country you want, as long as it was in California and it was public.
it was cheap, right? No, but you see, you need to provide a certain level of support in order to allow that experience.
But it was a ticket to
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's an interesting model being tried in a couple places in the country where a kid goes to a high school, and high school goes to 13 years, not 12, and the kid graduates high school with having completed the first 2 years of junior college. So that the high school actually initiates the kid into university life. So the kid then goes to a university either halfway or all the way through their sophomore year with advanced credit, but having learned how to deal with the university. But the tuition issue and the cultural issue of getting a broader swath of the population into and through university is a very, very important step for the culture, and many, many reasons. Because the economy is now based on the manipulation of symbols, not on the manipulation of things. There was a time when a young man could finish high school, go to the military, come back, and make cars or make steel or lay pipe and make a very, very nice middle-class living. That doesn't exist in America anymore, except in very small pockets. Now, you come out of a university, you have to know how to manipulate symbols. Okay? Because we do all the design work for the whole world. China builds all the stuff, we design it all. So a kid has to know how to manipulate symbols, and that's a very different set of skills, a very different orientation to the world. All right, a lot of comments. Yes, Sally, please.
The other problem with the Torah is this last paragraph that we read.
Yeah.
Which says, "You shall keep my Sabbaths and venerate my sanctuary."
Right.
That is not either a solution to the problem.
It is, if the problem isn't necessarily poverty, but the deeper problem is your attachment to economics. What is Shabbat? What happens on Shabbat? I stop defining myself as the productive man, and I enjoy myself as holy man, right? I enjoy layers of I define myself in different ways. If I don't keep Shabbat and I work 7 days a week, what I've effectively done is reduced myself to product. Right? I never escape from the economy. I never escape from the self-definition of myself as a person. My success is in what I produce. What Shabbat enforces upon you is a different way of thinking about yourself. I am not what I produce. I am what I am. I am the relationships that I cherish. I am the beauty that I enjoy. I am the truth that I absorb and I teach. You see? So Shabbat is related to this from the point of view of the priest, because Shabbat is the anti-economic holiday. It's the holiday. There's a real big reason why you're not allowed to use money on Shabbos, because you don't need to acquire anything. You put 2 challahs on the table Friday night so that you don't have to worry you're going to starve tomorrow. And now you can spend a day building relationships, enjoying truth, enjoying beauty, coming close to God, finding the person you are outside of the animal that needs to live and breathe and eat in the world. You see? So I think that Shabbat is deeply related to this. It's deeply related to this. Okay? I mean, one of the interesting statistics is how much unused vacation time there is in the American workforce. It's a really crazy statistic. You know, people have vacation they're not taking, right? Why? There's a lot of interesting reasons why. Part of it is insecurity. If I take vacation, they'll fire me. Part of it is this idea of, I am what I do, not I am what I am. It's a very interesting question, right? I did a funeral service for a guy this week, and the kid said a beautiful thing about this guy. He said he's a really high-level engineer, building high-level projects for aerospace companies. And every year he had 2 weeks vacation. And he told his people, I'm leaving on the day of my vacation and I'll be back when I'm done. And they say, but we have all these projects. He said, they'll wait. And the kid said, we're proud of Dad, because every year we knew we were going to have a trip together and Dad was going to be there. And when he was on vacation, boy, did he do vacation well. Right? I said, it's a beautiful thing to say. Right? I'd say it was a wonderful tribute to a guy. All right, we have to finish, so you get the last couple of comments here. I'm sorry that we didn't get everybody's. Yeah, farms, villages, towns, no cities. Absolutely. I do not advertise this as practical.
My question is, I deal with people, I meet people of all different economic status.
Yes. Yes, I.
And I don't see that the programs are helping people get out because of entitlement.
Right.
And many people are discouraged from finding work because they're getting a check every day.
Right. So the question is, the assumption of this text is that people work hard. The assumption of this text is that people want to contribute to a society. The assumption of this text is that people are connected to others. And the assumption of this text is a certain degree of community, of human solidarity, that people are not in this just for myself, but they're in it for the community. Look, I saw this. So my parents built a kibbutz in Israel. And over many summers and years of school, my brothers and I all got to work on the kibbutz. It was really interesting to watch the evolution of kibbutz. When my parents were young pioneers building the kibbutz, everybody gave their all for the kibbutz. They starved the kibbutz. They worked extra shifts for the kibbutz, right? And I remember sitting in the dining hall of the kibbutz with one of the chaverim, one of the founders of the kibbutz, one of the workers was one of our supervisors, and he says to me, see that schmuck in the corner? And he says, that guy gets up 2 hours after me. He cuts out of work in the middle of the day, takes a 2-hour coffee break. He finishes 4 o'clock in the afternoon. What a schmuck I am for working the hours I work. You began to see, even in the context of a kibbutz, the work ethic begins to, after the first generation of ideology, the ethic begins to dissipate. And instead of a sense of my job is to contribute to the community, it's what can I take? What can I take? And that was one of the downfalls of kibbutz. when kibbutzniks ceased to trust each other to be putting in all that they could. I mean, the ideology was, from each according to his abilities to each according to his needs. Well, yeah, if that's the way you think about it. But when someone begins to lose trust that everyone's putting in from their abilities and taking only what they need, and instead it becomes me and mine instead of us and ours, you lose the possibility. And what you're suggesting is that when a society provides incentives to not work, then you end up with a very warped society, a very difficult society. Right? But you got to go back. I want you to go back to the problem, though. I want you to go back and say, okay, fine, so you don't agree with this. I get that. I understand that. What are we going to do? With there's a really serious issue here, and if Bernie were a little more alarmist, you have a huge underclass in this culture. How long can you maintain that?
Go around telling people that they're entitled to have everything.
Right.
You urge them to teach their children.
Right.
To work and value or contributing.
Right.
And we're not doing that. We're teaching them what Bernie says. This should be free, that should be free. He's not demanding anything from the people.
I don't.
What he wants to give them.
Well, I'm not so sure, because one of the things he wants to make free, as Stuart pointed out, is school tuition. That's schooling. Not everybody's. Let's talk about this. But so now we have arrived at when I run for president. Now you've arrived at a very interesting conversation about the future of American capitalism, which I think is a very fruitful conversation. I have to stop here because we have guests in the other room. I wish everybody good Shabbos. Take good care.